Hello all, this is Cameo Flores and I am here today to talk to you about how borders can be conceptualized through audio means. So the title of my presentation is called Invisible Borders, Sonic Footprints, and we will be talking about how we can understand what the border sounds like at the US-Mexico border in three different mediums, and we'll cover that in a moment. So first of all, we need to ask ourselves, what actually is sonic placemaking? So my professor, Professor Feist, wrote, sound gives life to our environment, thereby heightening our experience of place, which basically means that sound in our environment can recreate a different environment if you displace it. So how I tend to envision it is a recreation of an environment's sounds to create a displaced environment of mimesis. So when we unpack that a little bit more, basically what this means is that we take an environment, say a classroom, and we want to recreate it in a different means. So we first have to think about what sounds are going on in a classroom. Typically, you would hear pencils writing, pens clicking, shuffling of paper, and usually someone who's lecturing. On occasion, you'll hear a seat shift and maybe like the air conditioning or the lights above you. And so what you do is you capture these ideas. You capture all these sounds in a specific recording, and then you play it back to a different audience in a different place, and you describe to them what this means and how this is actually a classroom, a recreation of classroom in that presentation. So a couple other ways to orally identify an environment. Think about an apartment. You typically hear AC, you might hear wind blowing by your window, you could hear people walking by your window or your door in your complex, you hear people driving, maybe some planes going to and from their different destinations. So that's a way you can orally identify an environment. And then say I play a backtrack to you where you hear an engine, you hear brakes squealing and stopping, you hear cars moving back and forth around you, and you hear something go into park. So this typically means it could be a drive to school. All of these examples are ideas of how you can recreate or identify an environment just by its what we call sonic environment. And when we do this, it is called sonic placemaking. So the big three phonies. Phony is a Latin word for sound, and the three phonies that we are going to be focusing on today are anthrophony, geophony, and biophony. So anthrophony is any sound that has a human element to it. So this means walking, coughing, breathing, talking. There are a couple different ways to conceptualize anthrophony. It can also mean that you are hearing something that is human-made. Now, geophony, on the other hand, is usually made by what we call non-living sounds or inorganic sounds. So this could be water running down a stream. This could be wind blowing through rocks. This could be sands shifting. And basically, these are made by an opposing force creating that sound. So when we hear sands shifting, we have to consider that wind is a force. So there's always many forces acting upon each other. And this is where things get a little complicated because anthrophony and geophony can work together. And humans can create geophony by hitting two rocks together, but they are also part of that environment. So really, when we are hearing things, there's no way that you can pull the human concept outside of geophony and biophony. So that's just something to consider when we listen to some examples after this. Finally, biophony is sounds of living beings. Yes, there can be human intervention, but biophony, when we think of sounds nature itself can make, we can think of frogs croaking, birds chirping and flapping. We can think about how cicadas make the little buzzing noise and how crickets interact with each other. So there's a large array of different ways we can think about biophony and how biophony is conceptualized and impacted. Again, there's the human intervention perspective. So if we listen to a recording or if we're actually making a recording, it's inevitable that you actually may hear yourself breathing in that biophonic recording, or you hear footsteps from people around you. So this is just a natural occurrence, and we aren't going to be thinking purely of just anthrophony, geophony, and biophony, but I'm going to give you examples to conceptualize just the idea of sounds of living beings, non-living sounds, and human-imposed sounds or human-made sounds. So with that, those are the three phonies that we're going to be focusing on in sonic placemaking. So after this, we're going to start conceptualizing how a place is made. So as the title mentioned, that we're going to be talking about the sonic footprints in the borderlands. This is specifically pertaining to the borderlands between Arizona in the United States and Mexico. And so before you listen, I want to encourage you to think about what borders are present in a recording. Think about how you as a human and the technology between you could potentially be a border. Think about how your mind and your body are two different entities, therefore your body could be acting as a barrier or as a border. You can also think about larger perspectives of border. So when people are talking to each other and there is a moment of silence in conversation, that silence could be a border. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about how we can think of borders in different voices. Okay, now we're going to think about how can sounds be musical. So because this is anthrophony, we can think about the three ideas that I listed to you: timbre, rhythm, and images. So timbre can mean when you hear my voice, is it smooth? Is it rough? Does it sound tired? So that's a way we can conceptualize timbre in an anthrophony. You can also think about rhythms. So what is the push and pull of my voice doing when I am talking? Do I take pauses in certain areas? Do I speak quickly in other areas or slow down? So that's something to consider in anthrophony as well. And you will hear different examples of walking and other human-imposed anthrophonic ideas. And then you can also describe these sounds and images. The one thing I don't want you to do right now when you listen to this recording is who is speaking, why were these voices chosen, and how do these voices represent borders. You're just going to think about the physical border, not the representation of the border. And we're going to try to practice this without judgment. So just describe these sounds without trying to prescribe, oh, this rhythm sounds like a child in distress. We're just going to talk about these when you listen. Here is your example.
Sounds like potentially several undocumented individuals, and the vehicle started driving off. Agents got behind the vehicle, and everybody called to bail out. Everybody bailed out of the vehicle. It's running right now.
Or a little boat trying to get across, and they'll be packed with, 10 or more people or something like that. Sometimes they'll just throw a kid off into the water just because they know that the agents will go for the kid right away to save them.
We came to the U.S. because there were people who wanted to hurt us.
But also, as they told me, it's a humanitarian mission as well, whether it's Mexicans or Americans or any other citizen of the world, who's passing through, they want to try to keep those people safe.
I'm hungry here at Clint all the time. I'm so hungry that I've woken up in the middle of the night with hunger. I'm too scared to ask the officials for any more food.
See that valley? Halfway up, there's 2 people, 3 people. See him? You get out of it.
She had no idea where he was for the better part of 3 weeks, and she was distraught over it. She's been deported back to Guatemala. No, I have a problem with people that use children for pawns, whether that be here in New York or in California or Texas or anywhere else in this country.
There's no easy solution, wall or no wall. And in the years of Donald Trump, it's come to symbolize America's complicated approach to its immigration challenges.
They find dead bodies a lot. They, witness a lot of trauma.
We catch about 300 individuals a day.
I hate this whole, they're not drug dealer. I mean, yes, there could be, but these are desperate people who cannot make a living in their country.
Look at the pipe and look for any change in the pipe. And then this will pop out, and behind it will be an illicit tunnel that you can crawl through across the border.
So this is one spot where they cut it. Obviously you can see they didn't cut this last strand down here, so that was effective. But if you go over here to the left, you'll see a large area.
Holy
that's
cow,
a
look at
doggy
this.
door fix right there, where you're talking about people coming through. That's
The
what we call
wall,
doggy
as
door.
it does in so many places along the border, just kind of ends, leaving significantly
My
less
sister
of a
and I
barrier.
hold a blanket up for one another so no one can see us go to the bathroom.
I was wet when I got here and was placed in a cage without being given dry clothes.
There is no room to move without stepping over the others. We were not given a mat to sleep on, so we had to sleep on the cold concrete
floor. It is so
floor.
cold. I was shaking so
The
hard.
lights are on all the time. I would like to get some fresh air.
I've been here without bathing for 21 days.
We come out in the desert, and if we find an immigrant that needs help, we give them food, water, and give them medical care.
About 3 days ago, I got a fever.
These
They
children
moved me to a flu cell. There is no one to take care of you. They just give you pills twice.
¿Has hablado con ella? ¿O quieres hablar con ella otra vez? ¿Está Jessica? Ya, Jessica, no llores, ¿ok?
We get off periodically and just kind of take little trails and walk around. A lot of these people that are crossing over illegally or going to ports of entry, they've had tough lives, and they're trying to escape violence. They're trying to get a better life, and that's something I think that we should realize and understand as a country.
There are no activities, only crying.
From discarded water bottles dumped at the last moment to handprints left behind on the fencing itself.
But at the same time, people like the Border Patrol agents, their lives are at risk sometimes. People on all sides of the issue are going through tough things sometimes.
And even while drug smuggling has
We need
eased,
to see all aspects of it.
indeed, the divide in this country on what to do about any of it runs deep. Finding the border is simple.
But the people continue.
Just look for the big brown fence and the razor wire.
All right, so with that, I want to give you a couple moments to write down a few notes. How did you hear timbres rhythms, or can you describe any of these sounds in metaphors or images? So now that we have been able to identify anthrophony, the different ways to listen to anthrophony, now we can start asking ourselves and analyzing with a different type of judgment, who is speaking? Why are they speaking? And how do they represent the border conflict? Why did I, in my composition, choose these specific voices? And how are they representative of borders? All right, I will have you fill out some answers to these questions in the separate SurveyMonkey link. So we're going to continue on to geophony. So this is another personal composition, and to give you a little bit of background information, earlier this semester I went with my class to the US-Mexico border in the Oregon Pipe National Cactus Monument Park, and we got up around 4 a.m. and we went to go play on the border. So you're going to hear different renditions of what the physical border sounds like when interacting with geophonic sounds. So you're going to be hearing wind, you're going to be hearing rocks, and then you're going to be hearing the physical fence itself, which can be classified both in anthrophonic terms and geophonic terms. So I'm going to let you decide that. Before you listen, we're going to consider a couple questions. What sounds do you think you will hear when we're talking about the US-Mexico border? How is geophony musical? How can wind, how can rocks moving against each other be musical? And then what borders are present in geophony? So we can think in broad contexts and small contexts. Broad meaning we can look at physical geographic terrain and the different terrains, how wind moves through different valleys can be present in geophony. And then we can look at the micro and see how one little section of a stream creates a certain sound or series of sounds when it goes over a rock. Now, while you listen, we're going to be listening for the same 3 ideas that we listened to in the anthrophonic recording. I encourage you to write these ideas down so we can, so I can gather data in the SurveyMonkey. And then we're not going to think about where the sources of sound come from, any representations or abstract ideas. We're just going to focus on the timbre, rhythm, and possible ways of visually conceptualizing these sounds. All right. So we're going to listen to this again, and we're going to try to conceptualize past the timbre rhythm and thinking in images. And what I want you to do is to describe the physical sounds that you're hearing. Are they high in pitch? Are they resonant? Are they short in pitch? Are they low? Do they echo a certain way? And how fast does each sound fade? Can you compare them with any instruments that you are aware of, and why? So we're gonna listen to this again, and I will give you a little bit of time to think about how you can describe this in your own words. Don't be afraid to describe this using musical qualities, using just any language that you find is helpful for you to describe what you're hearing in this geophonic recording. All right. So, can you hear different intensities? Why or why not? We're going to continue listening to this, and we're going to also think about dynamics, louds and softs, maybe things we haven't heard before. Alrighty, so what do you think was the source of sound? Do you think that the source of the sounds that you were hearing were entirely geophonic, or do you think humans had a hand behind it? How does geophony and anthrophony work together to create a musical piece about what the border might say about border conflicts? How does this change how you think about borders? Go ahead and take a couple more minutes, or not minutes, seconds to write down any last thoughts that you have about this example. So the last recording we're going to listen to is about biophony. If you recall, biophony usually incorporates sounds of animals and living things. And so what I want you to do, and we're going to practice all the skills we learned today about listening for timbres, rhythms, or describing in images. We're going to also use the different tools about describing sounds, so high, low, resonant, echoey, short, all those examples that I gave you. And we're going to first think about, how can biophony be musical? So biophony, I think, can be conceptualized a little bit differently because we have had composers actually try to mimic different bird sounds. Messiaen was one of the more well-known composers that transcribed different ideas and sounds of bird calls. So biophony can be music in the sense of Western classical music. It can also be used in electronic music. So one of our local artists here and professors, Garth Payne, has gone to extents to turn some of his recordings of biophonic sounds within the desert. That also goes for anthrophonic, and geophonic recordings. And he's turned that into electrical music compositions. So that's something else to consider. And then I want you to think about, how can biophony represent a border? So do the sounds of animals change when there is a border put between them? Why do you think that is? Do you think that borders occur between animals without physical barriers? Are there mental barriers or survival-based barriers that keep animals from communicating in certain ways in certain times of the day? So we're going to listen to this recording. Actually, this is not my recording, just as a preface. This is someone from SoundCloud who recorded this dawn chorus in the Sonoran Desert. We're going to listen for the same three things. Again, use all your tools now, and we're going to listen to it twice. So you have a first chance to listen to just how this biophonic recording can be musical. And then the second time through, try to capture new ideas. This is one of the pros of having technology, is we can listen to these things over and over and see if we can catch smaller things that we didn't hear in the first listen. All right, here's the first listen. So as I was saying earlier, this isn't my recording. So you can actually visually see the sound waves going on in this SoundCloud recording. So one of the things to consider is sometimes visual aspects of sounds alert us to different ideas, and that is an inherently human part of just survival. When we think about our ancestors, they relied on different sounds, different cues like twigs breaking to let them know that something might be hunting them. So they, of course, would turn their head and look and rely on the visual stimulus to tell them whether or not they were being hunted or not. So this time, I invite you to close your eyes and try to reconceptualize and see how not having a visual helps you to hear different aspects of this recording. So, did you hear anything different this time? Why or not? Why not? Something that people tend to do when they listen to these different recordings is that they tend to focus on one sound. And so when you focus on one sound, that is called active listening. When you try to focus on an entire environment around you, that is called passive listening. So which one did you practice more today? How do you think borders were represented in this particular soundtrack? What is or are the sources of sound in this recording? So remember in the beginning we said we won't judge anything. Now's the time to kind of reflect and see, what were the sounds? Did you hear a specific animal? Were you surprised by any of the sounds that you heard? How come? So these are just a couple of different ways to conceptualize and practice what we call deep listening, where you take the time to really think about, what are you listening to? Where are the sources coming from? How do they interact with each other, and how do they represent a larger picture? In this case, we're talking about borders. So we can think about how anthrophony, geophony, and biophony work together to represent and work with a border. So for further questions, we can ask ourselves, what does a border mean? There are, yes, the physical borders that we have, like a fence between neighbors, or the US-Mexico border. There are also psychological borders. Sometimes when someone says something we don't like, we immediately shut down because we do not want to respond. That is a psychological border. Other borders might be technology, how we have to learn through technology now. So a lack of interface with person-to-person interaction could create a border. Past that, how is anthrophony, geophony, and biophony present at the border? So you heard 3 different perspectives, but I encourage you to think about how you can understand anthrophony, geophony, and biophony around the US-Mexico border or in a border in your own home. Listen to a door. How is anthrophony involved, geophony involved, and can you hear any biophonic aspects through a door, around a door, next to a door? These are all different ways we can think about borders. Why do our sonic footprints matter? So, have you taken the time to go out and just listen to nature around you? Can you see how construction of a certain wall or construction of certain buildings impact how you hear things or how things start to sound? Do certain surfaces create more echoes than others? And why is this important? Are humans louder than their surroundings? Why do you think that is? So when we think about borders, usually we think about the visual perspective. How can we see a border? Why is the border there? What does it look like? Does it look like it has a certain type of rough texture? Coloring is very important. Does it blend in with your environment? But here we can see that you can also hear borders, and borders impact how we hear on the 3 different phoning scales. So I encourage you, next time you come up to a border or you see a border, you think about what is going on with the sounds around it. Can I perceive the border in a sonic environment? Why or why not? So this is my contact information if you have any questions. I am happy to answer anything at my email here. And these are my works, different works that I have cited or I have been inspired by to create this presentation. Thank you so much for your time.